the Federal Open Market Committee just came out with its minutes for its last meeting. Looks as if they're indicating that they see further raises in rates of between 50 and 75 basis points. Any reactions to that? Is that priced in? Are there any signals in the rest of the minutes that you read that were important?
No, unfortunately, because we certainly have plenty of drama to talk about in the crypto markets, I don't think there was much drama in today's FOMC minutes. At the end of the day, the market has, I think, priced in quite efficiently a 50, in my opinion, probably a 75-point rate hike, basis point rate hike coming up at the next Fed meeting. At the end of the day, what I think is going to become apparent is that we are already in a recession. I think Q2 numbers will show negative GDP growth, as you and most of our viewers know. That is one of the primary metrics of whether or not we are technically in a recession. Obviously, we have negative GDP growth in Q1. I expect Q2 to come out the same way. Really, the only bright spot in all of this is that we don't have the accompanying significant drop in employment. We're going to find out whether or not that trend continues in terms of the stabilization of the labor market. We had the JOLTS report come out today, which showed that we had about 11.5 million job openings still, but I don't expect that the new claim numbers that will be released on Friday will show anything other than a sort of continued smoothing of volatility in the labor market. That's a good thing for the Fed. That's a good thing for rates, and that's a good thing for whether or not we're in a sort of a soft or a hard recession. Of course, we continue to watch things like the 10-year. We'd like to see that drop below 2.7. I'd like to see it in the 2.5, 2.6 range. That would be another indication that inflation is perhaps cooling, but not a lot of news in today's Fed minutes.
Just generally, before we get into the crypto-relevant stuff that's important to these markets, what does, to your mind, for Bitcoin, the prospect of a soft landing versus a hard landing mean? What is the more favorable outcome for Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, it goes to sort of the broader story of Bitcoin's continued price action and correlation to risk assets in the equity markets, which is frankly how Bitcoin continues to perform, even watching how it's performed just in the past couple of days in terms of its relative parity to the NASDAQ and to the VIX. So if we have a so-called soft recession, one that is, hopefully something we can emerge from quickly, Bitcoin will be favorably treated as it will not be continually rotated out with other risk assets. And frankly, that's what we have been seeing in the downward pressure on Bitcoin price action. But I think a point you made earlier is a really important one. We are not seeing Bitcoin respond to the negative news of things, like Voyager, Vlad, and other platforms, and that sort of platform contagion that we're dealing with. I think that's a sign of strength for Bitcoin.
So, meaning that a lot of this chaos is kind of priced in. Have we sort of, or a view that like ultimately that chaos itself is bottoming out?
Well, no. So I don't know that it's necessarily priced in, because I think particularly with Voyager's situation, it caught a lot of traders by surprise. So I'm a little bit reticent to suggest that the recent news of these exchanges and these platforms having these structural issues and failures really is priced in. I think it demonstrates that Bitcoin, at least, is far more correlated to broader risk assets, equity technology stocks, and things of that nature. And it's sort of shrugging this news off. But I wouldn't say that it's priced in from traders' perspective.
So the macro story is the one that people really should be watching at this point more than anything else, specifically for trading, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
What about the regulatory signals, though? Because obviously, this story is one that will have the eyes of Washington on it. It's hard to imagine it not impacting at least the perception that lawmakers and policymakers have about this. And what does that sort of mean for the I suppose, medium to longer term outlook for Bitcoin and other crypto assets?
Well, Bitcoin, as you know, enjoys some regulatory certainty in terms of whether it's fish or fowl, right? So Bitcoin, I think, is safe. The rest of crypto, obviously subject to some significant regulatory scrutiny and things like what happened today with Voyager and and Terra Luna and Celsius only sort of amp up the heat, if you will, from a regulatory perspective. What's more interesting, perhaps, though, is what may or may not happen and when, right? So a couple of things at play. We had the Loomis Gillibrand bill that was dropped, I guess, about 2 weeks ago now. One of arguably the most well-crafted and comprehensive approaches to cryptocurrency regulation that we've seen to date. We have ongoing infighting among the SEC, the CFTC, and other regulators as to who gets to govern in what part of the marketplace. And, we have a legislature that, for the time being and the foreseeable future, particularly as we see what we anticipate the outcome of the November midterms to be, is really unable to pass any significant legislation. Of course, we also still have the results or the feedback of Biden's executive order homework assignment to every regulatory agency under the sun as it relates to a cryptocurrency. So a lot of talk. I don't see anything happening in the short term. You could, however, see enforcement action, primarily from the SEC. I think Gensler is going to be prompted, perhaps, or under more pressure to act from an enforcement perspective in the wake of some of the latest crises. But regulation through enforcement is never a good thing, in my opinion. So we'll have to see how that all plays out.